Hi, welcome to the video interview series by Law Firm Ready. My name is Jyotirmoy and I'm your host for today. Today I have the privilege of hosting Mr. Abhishek Subbaiah, who's the managing partner at Bridge Legal. Abhishek graduated from NLSIU in 2013 and joined ICICI Bank. Later, he went on to work with several top tier law firms such as Khaitan, JSA, and now he runs his own law firm by the name of Bridge Legal. So, thank you, Abhishek, for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm very well. How are you?
Good too. So thank you for joining us.
Great.
So Abhishek, just to start off, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, your journey as a lawyer? How has it been for you till now?
It's very simple. Like I said, graduated from NLS in 2013. ICICI, a bit of CAM, a bit of JSA, and now my own firm. It's grounding in banking and finance originally. Moved on to tech. Of course, the two converged uh, quite a few years ago. So now into a little bit of both, and also a lot of emerging markets. Stuff like esports, anything that tickles our fancy here. So doing a lot of stuff that most people aren't doing, basically. So
Like, what sort of inspired you to take up law as a career?
I'd be lying if I said that it was planned from the beginning. It was something that just drifted into place in a sense. Of course, in India, once you graduate, you don't have too many options if you want to follow something that's. Of course, parents always want you to follow something that's risk averse, right? So the family is full of people with alternate careers, but uh, you know, being a lawyer seemed like a safe bet at the time. Of course, I've taken something that's inherently very safe and now made it incredibly risky. So goes on to show that if you're looking for risk, you'll always find it. So yeah, it just fell into place in that sense. Through law school, of course, you'd figure out the subjects that interest you. Something that a lot of people don't speak about is the kind of lifestyle that you see yourself having once you graduate as well. So, a couple of my very close friends are very good litigators, and they've always dreamt of going to court and arguing. Some of us have, it's a very pejorative term now, but in terms of dealing with corporate, essentially, we've always preferred that in that sense. So. Uh, some prefer to just go ahead and do a lot of academic related work, so that's great as well. So in that sense, it just kind of filtered step by step, I'd say,
Right.
through law school and then through jobs, and as you have your tryst with different kinds of laws and regs and regulators and teams as well, so and cities as well. That's something that's very important. You just you find your place, and it's hard to say. I think that's a continuing process. It would be very hard for me to say that I'm already at my destination. It's a constant process. So
Right.
that kind of
Uh,
evolution that we're doing.
Abhishek, so you said that you started off as a banking lawyer and you moved from ICICI Bank to law firms, which is usually people go from law firms to in-house. So you moved to law
Yeah.
firms from in-house, and then you also,
Why do you think people go from law firms to in-house? I have to ask you that question.
I think people have this idea that in-house is usually a less pressure environment where they have less work and you can probably get off work earlier than in a law firm. So I guess that's the idea. But what about you?
That's half true. That's half untrue. But that is the reason most people think the shift happens. It's a lot more structured. That's the best way to put it, right? So
Right.
the reason I shifted or went the other way around was precisely because of that. I was looking for something that was the opposite essentially. So I didn't want to plateau too early, and of course when you're 25, of course I'm hoping I'm not that old right now as well, but when you're 25, you're reckless. You really want that high energy environment where you have that appetite for just doing as much work as possible. And of course I'm not speaking for everyone here, but
Right.
I was looking for that. I was looking to, okay, I've heard that these guys do a lot of hardcore work. I've seen the in-house side of things, so let's go and see what the big fuss is about. So it was a bit of that, just kind of figuring out, okay, so what's the big deal with tier one firms, especially. So if you look at my CV, and I keep saying this, and by the way, caveat, I may not be the best template to be here because I think I'm I don't know, the worst candidate in a sense. I've been with what three tier one firms, two
Right.
extremely large organizations. That's within a decade. So clearly, I get bored. Clearly, I take extremely high risks. It's also about just doing something that's new. That may not fit everyone. So
Right.
big caveat: this is not advice to everyone. I've seen people be in one job for decades and decades, and they're super happy about it. So coming back to the point, it was just about trying out new things, trying to figure out, like we were talking about when we started off this conversation as to uh, getting into that position, right? That starts with exploring essentially, and I've done a lot of that essentially. I've explored, played the field quite a bit essentially. So that was the reason, just kind of getting the landscape in a sense, and that helps right now in this position. That helps because I've seen the in-house side of things, I've seen the law firm side of things, especially the tier one side of things. So there are a lot of good things, a lot of bad things. So you can kind of take it, apply it, and see what applies to you in this situation. That in my opinion is experience. So it's been a good experience in that sense.
You rightly mentioned that people should work in one particular law firm like at least for 3-4 years, but you've switched law firms and tier one law firms within a year or so. So have you felt that has negatively affected your career and experience in any manner?
It's negatively affected in the sense that it's a lot harder to explain to someone if you're trying to look for a job or something like that. But
Right.
it's not really affected me in that sense because see if someone's going to be looking at just labels and trying to say that okay, this person has been in this place for at least 3 to 4 years. First of all, where do you get 3 to 4 years from? I've seen people work in 1 year more than some people have worked in 4 to 5 years. So that's just recruiters being lazy in that sense. But you'll always find recruiters who can actually see potential. And the biggest question is, yes, I did shift firms quite often, but you always had a firm ready to take me as well. So that's the most important
Right.
question. Does the industry actually care? If you're good, not really. So is it
Right.
harder to justify the situation? Yeah, I mean, if you're selling your profile in the sense to say that I'm going to stay with your firm for at least 5 to 10 years, yeah, you should sell it for that. But if you're going to come on to a firm and say that, listen, I'm just really good at what I do, you can take me, or you don't take me, whatever. So if you want to take the latter approach, it works. Is it a harder path for a lot of people? Obviously, you need to be really, really, really good. Your reputation needs to be solid as well. Uh, our industry isn't the best in terms of ethics in that sense. So if you usually move from one place to another, there's a lot of backballing in that sense. So you need to be really good to be able to do that. I don't advise it at all. It worked for me because this was always the end goal. So for me, it worked out. I never planned to stay in one place too long unless it was my own business. So
So do you think,
yeah.
so what would you say was like a difference in terms of working culture or experience with different seniors? Was there anything like that? And do you think that sort of impacted your decision to start off your own firm?
There is a huge difference, but I wouldn't say that it's firm wide. So I wouldn't say that this
Okay.
firm is better than that firm. It's definitely dependent on the team and the people in a particular team,
Right.
obviously. So yeah, this is actually a very important question. So the last firm I was with was actually JSA, which I believe you're working with right now. So I was not
Right.
unsatisfied at all. So me leaving JSA and starting off my own thing was only because I just wanted the freedom to play with a lot of variables. So the deal with very good organizations, JSA especially, that I quite like even now is uh, they have structures, they have rules. You need to play by a playbook. That's great. That works really well. So for me, it just made sense. A in terms of location, just having the freedom to just take on a lot of clients. I do a lot of work for free, by the way, because a lot of the clients I work with are startups, and I would, in a real law firm scenario, imagine putting that on a timesheet. That would be an absolute nightmare, right? So, just having the ability to play around, do something new. The podcast as well that we do. I would never, be that casual in, let's say, a JSA or a CAM or anywhere else. So, in that sense, that stylistic preference is the only reason. It's just the freedom to. I had a few ideas, that I wanted to incorporate, and that's the only reason, and that should be the only reason, by the way. If you're starting up your own thing or actually even leaving a place, uh, it should just be because you feel that you can do more in another situation. It should never be, oh, this was lacking in this particular place. It's just a question of perspective. Of course, I'm saying the same
Right.
thing, as you can realize, but that's about it. So from firm to firm, yeah, there was a huge difference. But there are good and bad people in every firm. There were 400 plus lawyers in most tier one firms. You can't paint all
Right.
of them with the same brush. Honestly, like some of them are great,
Absolutely.
some of them are less than great. But yeah. So me specifically, especially with Bridge Legal, the last firm I was with was of course JSA, and that's really it. Really, it's the ability to just play around with variables that you can do what you want essentially. I would never be in JSA through 2021 the way I've had 2021 this year, which is just working with a lot of very new emerging clients. Some of them can't pay a dime. Working on the podcast, just complete non-billable stuff. It would be an absolute nightmare essentially for any personality on firm. If you look at my time sheets, especially.
Coming to your point about working with startups, I think I came across one of your
Yeah,
LinkedIn posts where you said that like for some clients you charge them like the market fees, and for some of them you just waive it off, and people ask you why, and you said that that's because
yeah,
when their startups are just growing up, I mean you can't really expect them to pay that much, but there's a
yep.
problem when people who have the capacity to pay they don't want to pay. So I mean that's a very interesting point. That
Yeah.
I read. So tell me, so you start off as a banking lawyer, now you're working with startups, and I'm guessing you're also working on a lot of like PEVC funding or maybe mergers and acquisitions. So how has that transition been for you?
PC funding is always, iffy because it's a very niche market. So usually if a client comes and says that, I need a lawyer, so they're going to ask for PVC experience. So uh, we almost sealed an NFT transaction, for example, very recently. But,
Right,
the client wanted something that was, more PVC heavy. And I'm more on the debt side of things, essentially, right?
right,
Of course, the two have converged quite a bit over the past 5 years. But if you're looking at core PVC, you do need someone with that kind of track record, which is why we have. So one of our councils has is very securities heavy essentially. So I rely on him for that angle of the work essentially. So
right,
I can't do everything in that sense. So right now
right, right,
I'm in terms of just tracking developments and kind of honing my expertise. I'm already stretched thin in that sense of between debt, between tech, between finance in general, as well as emerging stuff. It's a privacy is a big aspect as well. IP is something that's unavoidable for a lot of markets. So between all of these things, yeah, PVC is something that I. It's a very good question that you've raised. I didn't do too much of securities work, growing up, as I would like to call it, but I have people to work with me on that. So it's not really core bit of expertise that I need to really bring to the table. So that's another thing. So once you
right.
set something up, and once you actually partner with people, you have partners who have that kind of experience. Litigation, for example, I don't have that much litigation experience. I know what it's like to prevent litigation from happening, and there's of course the corporate side of things. But two of my counsel are very heavy on the lit side. So you collaborate in that sense.
You need a well balanced ship.
For sure, for sure,
Uh,
for sure. You need a well-balanced crew. Very well-distributed classes. Everyone being good at what they do. Yeah,
I'd seen one of your LinkedIn posts. You'd worked with some e-gaming sports company. Can you tell us a bit about that? How was it working with them?
it's amazing. One of the best clients I've had actually. So this was a I don't know what I can say and can't say right now. I'm just trying to be very careful with my words because it's not just me. But uh, so there was an esports company. We reached out to them. I'm a huge fan of podcasts, so I'd heard one of the founders, get on a podcast and talk about their startup journey, and it really resonated with me. I of course game, by the way. I don't game as much as I should be, but definitely a passion of mine in that sense. So, I just it was one of those cold calls. I just cold called this guy and said, "Hey, what's up? Do you want to get on a call? And this is what we can do for you, essentially." And these guys were very point blank, where they said that, "Listen, we're not sure about getting lawyers." And you see this with a lot of startups, right? Lawyers are expensive. We don't really want to get into that. What can you do for us, etc. So we just and till date they're one of the clients for which we don't really look at the billables per se. We treat it as one of our own businesses. And this relationship started off in I think May or June, and it's absolutely wonderful. These guys have been growing, doing really great work, and it's like the other post that I mentioned where you see someone growing up and you kind of take you with them. So
Right.
yeah, we've been growing with them essentially. So it's a fantastic experience in terms of and these are all young guys, right? Young founders raising money from investors. I think the same age as me, or maybe a year or two, this side, that side. But we have conversations. It's a lot. It's a lot of fun. It's not the the formal situation that we usually see in firms where you go to a client meeting or you're having a client discussion and extremely formal. This is just almost like in-house in that sense, and this is where the in-house bit comes in, right? Where it's a lot less formal. You're working with the business to collaborate with them, and in that sense, it's great. So these guys do a lot of esports reporting, and as you may or may not know, there's been a lot of tectonic shifts that have been happening in that industry in terms of regulations as well. Um, so yeah, it's been absolutely great, like working with them, young blood, and we're looking for more clients like them. Essentially, they're the best clients that I've
And
had.
that's very interesting to hear about this your experience.
Yeah,
Coming to the next point, I mean, you have your own legal podcast, and I think in India we don't really have that many podcasts dedicated to the legal sector, so to say.
yeah.
So can you tell us a bit about that, like what your idea, what your broad vision is with your podcast?
That's why we're kind of evolving in that sense. But I was talking about just the playground version of kind of going about things. So it's been a while since we released the last episode. I had a few, throat issues in between, so I couldn't record, and that's the issue with podcasts. It's not you can't just type out and proofread and lay out an article. And if anyone's done a podcast, I
Right.
mean, try doing it. It's extremely hard to actually get the production values accurate. Everything from getting your voice right to getting the quality on point. Also, it's not something that we just get on and ramble. It's actually a well written script that
Structured process.
it's structured, and it's actually 2-3 steps higher than writing an article, because you actually have to articulate it, edit it, and then put it out. So we want to do something different. So I've been extremely irregular with it because we've been trying to work out the best way to go about it. Excuse my cat, by the way. It's that's the evening when he usually likes some attention. But
Right.
um, yeah, so we're trying to make it a little different. I'm trying to make it maybe shifted into maybe a more casual, the way it is currently, humorous podcast, and at the same time keep a separate, maybe shorter weekly kind of situation. So we're working on that right now. But essentially, I don't know if you've heard the podcast. It's like currently right now, if you've heard the terms Pegasus, and if you've heard general terms of what's happening with the NDPS and Aryan Khan, from the legal perspective, or you're just trying to understand what's happening with the IT rules, and you just want a podcast and you can just hear and just kind of get up to speed with. That's the whole point of it, without having to read 100 sources. And
So are you like inspired by any like podcasts in the UK or US? I mean, like what inspiration behind your
I'm not taking a political stance, but I've always been a huge Joe Rogan fan. So
okay.
me and my friends, we're a huge Joe Rogan fans since I don't know 2016, 2017, and we're actually going to move to video. So 2022 is when we actually want to move to video, where we can actually have guests over, have a few conversations, but essentially that not too formal of a structure, but also talking about very relevant things, not necessarily structured on just a case summary, which is what we're used to. I think
Right,
lawyer life,
absolutely.
when it comes to content, is a bit too dry, and it doesn't have to be, by the way. So most interactions,
Agree with you,
let's
yeah.
say in an office, yeah, it doesn't need to be that dry. I mean, you can be academic and thorough, but at the same time, you can have a bit of humor attached to it as well. Essentially, it shouldn't be a
Right.
boring podcast. That's another thing. So I try to limit it to
So
15
Abhishek,
minutes, and those 15
uh,
minutes, yeah, they shouldn't be too boring.
right.
Essentially,
So Abhishek, we can have your cat on the screen if he wants to join us. I mean, we don't mind. What's
he's
his name, by
uh,
the way?
he's uh, his name's Snap. He's actually from law school. So
Coming to the last question, I mean, so
yeah.
you had considerable experience in the industry. Now you also run your own law firm. So what would you sort of have advice maybe young viewers who are still in law school?
There's something that gets discounted a lot when people talk about the lifestyle choices, but I think that's really important. So you'll see that there are the few people who actually, quite a few people in tier one firms, who really like the lifestyle, right? They really like grinding. They like working that hard, work hard, play hard, all of it put together, and that's the way that lifestyle is, right? Where you're just trying to service a lot of clients, trying to be the best in terms of being on edge basically all the time. You've obviously got litigators as well who have their own lifestyle. That can also be extremely strenuous. The biggest piece of advice I would say is just to observe, who do you look up to? That has to be the biggest question, right? So
Right.
if you're working, if you're interning in a place and you see someone working, do you see yourself doing the same kind of work for the same number of hours within the same environment, essentially? An office environment, let's say, in a tier one firm is very different from an office environment in a tier three firm or a tier two firm. First off, I don't like using the term tiers, because it generally indicates size. I think now at this point it just indicates size, right? Size of deals, size of lawyers, that kind of stuff. So that's a bad example, but essentially you could have really big firms who also have teams that are very, uh, they close knit. They also have a very warm kind of culture. You have some
Right.
cultures that are extremely formal, extremely cold. Not a bad thing. It's just, to each his or her own. So the biggest advice, so
Right.
when you're in law school, first off, the subject, so if you like a particular subject doesn't necessarily mean that, in practice it's going to be the same thing. I absolutely loved IPR, right? But when you start off with IPR, it's a very different situation, right? I looked at my lifestyle as being extremely corporate in that sense. So the banking finance framework kind of set into that, right? It's a formal environment. It's like classical music in law, essentially, right? A lot of the agreements are very old school clauses, extremely long. So that kind of stuff. Uh, so yeah, just observe, and that's really the importance of an internship. So when I see a lot of students saying that they want to intern at this particular place because they want a job there, why? You're not really exploring what you'd like or what you wouldn't like, right? And there's no harm in having a bad internship. I've had a few of those as well. You go through an internship and you're like, oh, I absolutely do not like this kind of work. uh, that's really important. And once you graduate as well, uh, it's really important to find out what kind of lifestyle you want. That's really important. I think that's very underplayed. So if you have someone you look up to who's 5 years into the industry or 10 years into the industry, because then you can look at the markers, right? You're not automatically going to jump to partner and have a partner lifestyle at one point, right? So if let's say you're looking up to an SA or you're looking up to even an associate in their first or second year or whatever, if that's the kind of life you want, and you're speaking to them and they're saying that, oh wow, I really like my job, that's what you should be doing. But if you come across someone who says that, I absolutely hate my job, but I'm doing it, but I'm at the best firm, I'm in the best team, do you really want to be that person? That's got to be the biggest question, right? So
Right.
that's about it. Lastly, just to seal that off, it doesn't end at graduation. You can find a new job. It doesn't end there. You're not signing up to a permanent situation, right? Although it's really good if you find what you're looking for initially itself. But you can always change. You can always expand your horizons. A lot of people do that. So, but a lot of people are also scared. 2 3 years into their career, they just what if you're gonna have to start from scratch, right? Because it's not your core area of expertise. If you want to learn something new, but you should. If you want to learn something new, you should. And if you feel like your area of practice is not what you want to be doing, then you should be able to shift. Which is why the first 2 3 years are extremely important. In terms of just getting that foundation and trying to figure out where you can go, what you can do, etc. So that's really important, I would say. Just to round up that question, just find someone who you look up to, ask them a few questions, ask them about what their typical work day is like, and yeah, also ask them how much they earn. I mean, money is a critical factor. I love how we downplay money all the time, but it's a very very critical factor. And if you as a law student want to get a big salary once you graduate, that there's nothing to be ashamed of for that. That's fine. If that's something you need, that's fine. In fact, more often than not, someone who's looking for money that badly usually does not have much of it. So it's usually the other way around. Someone who's usually grown up with a lot of money won't really want to necessarily chase a high paying job. So that's something that I really I don't like when people do that. When they start judging people who chase corporate jobs. That's fine. That's your choice. If you want money, go for it. Money is extremely underrated, I would say.
Uh, Uh, no, and I absolutely agree with you. I mean, and also I think a very
Yeah.
important point that you mentioned, that you should have somebody to look up to, because that sort of helps you get through the initial years. And I think that's why at Law Firm Ready we run our mentorship program where we help students get mentors who are working in these law firms who've been there and know how it is going through that entire phase. So
Yeah.
Abhishek, it was really great talking to you. I mean, your answers were really insightful. So thank you so much for joining us today.
No worries.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. The door's always open, and have a nice day.